Have you ever felt overwhelmed with life and you don't even know if you can get up in the morning or go to work, or go back to church, or go to a social function because of a devastating loss you've experienced? And of course, those losses could be a number of things, but you might have lost the dearest on earth to you and you don't even know what to do anymore. And you're in this deep grief state and overwhelmed with sorrow and sadness and no energy to get back and live life again. And are you there right now? I've been there. I know what that's like. The people that work with us at Spark of Life know what that is like as well, because we've all been there. I want to share with you something amazingly simple today that can give you more hope than when the day started. And we all need more hope. And if at the end of this video, you have 1/10 more hope than you had at the first, then this video has been worth watching. Thousands of grievers since we started Spark of Life in 2009 have taught us this. They've taught us some amazingly simple principles that are really hard to do, because as we continue in our grief, we have so many things we need to do and so many concepts to consider. And at Spark of Life, we've done over 120 3.5-day retreats where we get to be with the people for 3.5 days. And people have literally come from all over the world. And as you're listening to this, I want to share one thing that we have people do at the retreat, at the end of the retreat, because what we know is that grief gets complicated and grief is overwhelming. So this one thing is so powerful, and we call it anchors to sails. You know, I don't have a boat, but many people do have boats. And if you have a sailboat, you probably use an anchor and when the boat's in dock. And some people never get in their boat and sail around the world. They never use the boat for what it's meant to be. When we experience loss, it's easy to be anchored to our losses. And we're afraid to get out there and live again. We don't know how I can live without my spouse or my child or whoever I lost or whatever I lost. And we don't see a way past it. And we're so engulfed in our sadness and our grief, which is natural and normal. Sometimes we lose sight of the possibility of pulling up anchor and sailing into the open seas, because the open seas are fraught with a lot of danger in our minds. And because that open sea, that living life, the way it was meant to be lived, is without maybe the closest on earth to me that I lost. So we want to break it down. And this anchors to sail thing has proved to be so powerful for people to say, and here's how we frame it at the retreat. When you leave this retreat, what is the one thing you need to do to continue living forward in a healthy recovery with the pain of your loss? And we say this in almost every video and every retreat, every time I speak on grief. We at Spark of Life, or any other people or organization that works with grievers, we cannot take away your pain. We don't have that power. We say in other videos and other teachings that you have to own your own recovery. You have to get to the attitude of saying, I need to make a decision to recover and not necessarily wait for the emotion to come. And as you're watching this now, many of you are overwhelmed. And that word just keeps coming back over and over to the people we work with on a continuing basis. David, I feel overwhelmed. I feel helpless. I feel hopeless. I feel deep sadness. I feel anger. All these emotions come. But today I want to talk about this amazingly profound, simple concept of reducing what you need to do to one thing. What one thing do you need to do to pull that anchor up and to start sailing again in life that can get you started? Don't try to do two things. Try to do one thing. What's the one thing you need to do? We had started using this concept in all our retreats from 2009 on, and we had a section of anchors to sails. And I found a book by Gary Keller called The One Thing. I've referred this in other videos, but I want to share it again with you. The One Thing by Gary Keller. Gary Keller is the founder of Keller Williams Realty. It's one of the largest realty companies in the world. And he tells in the book about how a change of strategy in his leadership team changed everything for his company. And basically, he had his 16 leaders in his company focus on one thing they had to do this week to make their business successful. What's the one thing? If you only had one thing to do, could you do that one thing this week that you need to do? And then he added something to that statement. What is the one thing you need to do, the doing of which would make the things that other things you need to do either easier or unnecessary? So, what's the most important thing you have to do this week to be successful? Just focus on one thing. If you did that one thing and accomplished it, you would have a feeling of accomplishment, number one. And number two, you might have to do some other things, but because you did the most important thing, other things you have to do to be successful in your business becomes easier or maybe even unnecessary. And after his leaders bought into that philosophy, sales went through the roof. So he wrote a book called The One Thing. It's an amazingly simple concept. So we started using that Gary Keller illustration in our grief work. And it's amazing what it does for people. You know what it does? It helps you deal with the overwhelming feelings that I can't even get out of bed this morning. And if you connect it to this philosophy of you own your own recovery, and again, a key concept, you own it, nobody else, and the concept that you keep it simple and you own it and you get up and we call it metaphorically, wash your face on the principle that recovery is a decision you make, not an emotion you feel. If I wait for my emotions to feel all giddy and hopeful, I might wait a long time. The problem with debilitating grief and not getting out of that pit of grief, you can't get out of your pain. We don't want our grief to debilitate us and ruin other relationships we want to keep. And we see it happen all the time. We don't want our grief to be debilitating to the point that it starts to destroy other relationships. And I never pull up anchor and sail and live life forward. There's a big difference between living life forward and existing forward. So David, but I'm overwhelmed. I know you're overwhelmed. So we want to encourage you to do one thing. Keller in his book talks about the domino effect, and the world record for dominoes setting up and knocking them over is I think it's 4.5 million or it's 5.5 million. It was done by a Netherlands domino factory company that manufactured dominoes in the Netherlands, and they set the world record, the Guinness Book of World Records. Now, I found out reading Keller's book that there is something called joules of energy. A joule of energy is a measurement of energy. And we're not going to get too complicated here because, number one, I can't get that complicated. Number two, we want to get the principle. A joule of energy that it takes, it's a measurement of energy. We had a medical doctor said that a joule of energy, 200 joules of energy is the amount of energy used when you take the paddles and paddle somebody when their heart stops to paddle them. You've seen that on TV. I'm sure some of you have probably had it done. This doctor said it's about 200 joules of energy that is generated with those paddles. If you knock over one domino, that knocks over 4.5 to 5 million other dominoes, as this company did. It generates 95,000 joules of energy for you to do one thing. Yeah, somebody had to set up the dominoes, but once they're set up and you just knock over the first domino, and then Keller cites a physicist that has done experiments and has determined that one domino can knock over another domino 1.5 times its size. So if you started with a 2-inch domino and the next domino is 3 inches and the next one's 4.5 and 1.5 times the previous one, and you line them up, and you start with the 2-inch domino, the 10th domino would be as tall as Peyton Manning. He used to be a football player. Now he's a comedian. You probably heard of Peyton Manning. I think he's 6'4", 6'5". So if you start with a 2-inch domino and each domino is 1.5 times the size of the previous, the 10th domino would be as tall as Peyton Manning. The 18th domino would be as tall as the Leaning Tower of Pisa. 23rd domino as tall as the Eiffel Tower. 31st domino, 3,000 feet above Mount Everest. The 57th domino would be from the Earth to the moon. 57 domino. You're sitting at the 2-inch domino, overwhelmed with grief and loss and pain and sadness, not knowing if you can ever live again, pretty much convinced you're hopeless and helpless. And will I ever be happy again? And you probably have said, no, I can never be happy again because of your feelings of sadness, because of your deep grief. And sometimes that causes people to accept a life full of sadness the rest of their life and unproductivity and maybe hurting a lot of other relationships. So at Spark of Life, we believe that there's always hope to get up from loss, giving myself permission to grieve, not beating myself up because I'm in that pit of grief, but I have to go there because grief means you love, but not staying in the depths of the pit, not letting my grief debilitate me for the rest of my life. So I get up and wash my face, which means I get up and do the next right thing. When I reduce my recovery from 57th domino, I cannot get from the earth to the moon today. You can't even get to the 10th domino today and knock over Peyton Manning. I don't know how big you are, but I'm 73 as I'm doing this video. If I try to knock over Peyton Manning, I'll probably dislocate my shoulder. I can't even get to the 10th domino today. But you know what I can do? I can knock over that 2-inch domino today. That's all I got to do. You say, well, that's pretty simple. Yeah, it's hard, though, to knock over the 2-inch domino when I'm feeling helpless and hopeless, isn't it? You've tried. But I want to encourage you today. So at our retreats, when we say, what's the one thing you need to do this week, the doing of which, in your recovery, the doing of which would make the other things you need to do either unnecessary or easier, the productivity goes through the roof because everybody can do one thing this week. What's one thing you have to do this week to continue your healthy recovery? Knock over the 2-inch domino, not the 2nd or the 10th or the 18th, you get it, or the 23rd. No, you're going to get hurt if you try to do too much. Knock over the next domino. Here's what some people have written in their Anchors to Sales notebook when they come to a Spark of Life grief retreat. One person said, I'm going to get out of bed before noon tomorrow morning. So their whole focus was to get out of bed before noon on one day. That was their one thing. Once she got out of bed and felt, wow, I'm out of bed before noon. I think she slept in till about 11. She stayed in bed, but she had promised her one thing was to get out of bed before noon, and it propelled her to do the next one thing. We had another person say he and his wife are going to go play golf again. They had not played golf for a year after their son died. They used to love to play golf with their son. One lady who lost her husband said, I'm going to go dancing again. My husband and I love to dance, and I haven't danced since my husband died 2 years ago. So she called a friend and said, you've got to make me go dancing. I'm going to go dancing. Whether I want to or not, I've got to go dancing again. And her and her friend went out to a club and started dancing. She did that one thing. It propelled her to do the next one thing. You get the point, don't you? It could even be, I'm going to go through my husband's things again. I've never been through his things since he died. One father told us who lost a 17-year-old daughter that he's going to go, the one thing he was going to do is go sit in his daughter's bedroom on her bed and just sit in her room. He had not been in her bedroom since his daughter had died. That was his one thing. You might need some help with your one thing. At Spark of Life, we want to walk beside you to help you have more hope than you've ever had. Hope to live forward with your pain. Wish we could take away your pain. We can't do it, but we can encourage you. At Spark of Life, we believe in hope, and we believe you can find hope again, just a little bit more hope than you had yesterday. Do the next one thing. At Spark of Life, there's always hope. Go to sparkoflife.org for help. We're here to help you. At Spark of Life, we believe in hope.